Hello? Thank you so much. Well, you know, maybe in the absence of a podium, I won't read you the speech. Maybe that would be better off. So, the question is that shorter than what I'm about to say? Since I know we all want to get to our meal here tonight. On a serious note, it's wonderful to be here this evening with my friends from CARECEN. And I do have to begin by saying, you know, we'll celebrate Saul's life here tonight. We all know him. I mean, I can't really think of an experience of being a member of Congress and Saul not being there at a march, at a press conference. You'd see him, he'd be organizing always with his energy, con su entusiasmo, ¿verdad? Y con su gran amor y compromiso con el pueblo. Así que cuando vino a mi oficina, sí, cuando vinieron los compañeros a mi oficina, yo le dije que sí. And plus, I have a very special, right, unique relationship with Central American community. And so I would like to say that I came here to celebrate Saúl and celebrate our relationship como puertorriqueño del Caribe y con todos mis amigos de Centroamérica. I'd like to thank all of the wonderful city council members and city elected officials, and obviously the ambassador. It's good to sit with him. As soon as I went out and extended him the hand, I wanted to give him a hug. It's always good to see friends because we all fight together for a community. I do want to announce that I have also something special that's happening in America. My daughter married this young Mexican man from Michoacan. And so they had Luisito, right, my grandson. And so now Luisito is of the raza cósmica, right? And so my daughter went and she introduced me to her boyfriend, right? And he's from Honduras, so I'm not quite sure. You know, I'm gonna have this interesting family and of grandchildren, right? Really representing the way Latinos are growing in America. Right, from Honduras in my case, and from Michoacán and Puerto Rico, y todo el mundo comiendo distintas cosas, pero celebrando la diversidad. And it's really great to watch. I wanted to share that with you as a special note about how, you know, I mean, I started in politics in the Puerto Rican independence movement in Puerto Rico. Y como que es un independentista que siempre, tú sabes, nosotros los boricuas y nuestra bandera. Pero ahora tenemos que compartir muchas banderas en la casa de Luis Gutierrez because we have such a richness and such a uniqueness that is America to us. So I wanted to share that with you. I also wanted to say, I think it's important to just go back to how we've collaborated, how when first time we collaborated, and there was that's the problem with not having the speech. But there was, you remember when it was kind of like they were stopping the deportations of Guatemalans and Salvadorans, there was a consent decree. But this consent decree had to keep being issued time and time again and extended. And then Clinton became president. And that's when I first met CARECEN. And that's when I first was blessed to receive information. For many years, we had always been collaborating, but never had met. Because in the 80s, I was always fighting in Chicago and in the Democratic Party, and yes, against Ronald Reagan. Because it was important to me. And so we were always collaborating because I said, why is it that guns and bombs are always sent for conflict? And now in 1993 that we are beginning the steps towards peace and reconciliation. There isn't a dollar to foster peace and reconciliation, but there was so much money for the weaponry that caused us devastation and harm and yes, murder throughout the streets and the valleys and the villages and the cities of Central America. So that's how we met. We'd always been fighting, but had never crossed paths. And so we went about creating what was called Nakata. And I remember I went to Miami on 2-3 occasions to meet with a large Nicaraguan community there. And you know what? I said, to hell with the civil wars of the past and continuing to fight them, and to the Cold War. And so I wrote a piece of legislation that said to Nicaraguans, regardless of how they came here or their political affiliations before they came here, that they would get, because they were going to deport all of the Nicaraguans, over 40,000 of them from Miami, and the order was clear. Salvadorians and Guatemalans were in a better situation with the consent decree, but we put them all together. And I said, let's put them, and you remember when we introduced the legislation. Unfortunately, we lost the elections in 1994, and I was no longer in the majority party in 1995. And so instead of it being Gutierrez Diaz-Balart, it became the Diaz-Balart Gutierrez bill. And the Cold War began all over again. And I remember going to my colleagues, Republican colleagues, and telling them, oh, thank you. I remember going to my Republican colleagues and telling them, to my Democratic colleagues, and telling them, this is for Salvadorians, this is for Guatemalans, this is for Central America, so that we can legalize their status. They came here seeking refuge, war, civil war, and it's time now that we settle this. And I remember, and then I said, and the Nicaraguans are included too. And I remember my Democratic colleagues saying, oh man, that was so good. I mean, Salvadorians, Guatemalans, right yet? I said, we need to do it. And I went to Republican colleagues, and I told them, we're going to put the Nicaraguans. And they were, oh sure, let me sign up. Love that. I said, but just so you know, and they would all say, oh, why? We had this wonderful opportunity, right? And we did, and we built bridges in the bill between, and we said, it is 93. Let's move forward. And then the Cold War raised its ugly head once again. And we all know that if you were Cuban, then you would, if you were Nicaraguan, then you would given the Cuban law of America. And if you were from any other part of Central America, it was a long, tedious, hard, and often fraught process to your legalization. And I remember how angry, many of you remember how angry I was. And I said, you know, I can stop this. Because Republicans aren't going to support this legislation. It's the Democrats that are going to have to support this legislation with a few Republicans. And I can go to my colleagues and I can tell them. And I remember how angry I was. For those of you who might remember Univision and Telemundo, and angry because I felt a sense of real betrayal. Because I thought we should all be in this together, right? And then Zoraida, my wife, mi esposa Zoraida estaba conmigo, y vimos el noticiero esa noche a las 10:30 de la noche, y ahí yo estaba Gutiérrez denunciando el proceso en Washington DC, y yo la miré a ella, estaba acostada al lado mío. Yo le dije, ¿qué tú crees? Y me dice, está bien que esté molesto, porque eso fue un abuso para los guatemaltecos, y lo sabes, es un abuso, pero tú no puedes sonreír un momentito y decir lo feliz que tú estás por los nicaragüenses, porque ellos no deben pagar por la politiquería de otros. ¿Sabe una cosa? Le seguimos adelante y no permitimos, ¿verdad?, que niños, madres que no tenían nada que ver sufrieran, y 10 de miles de nicaragüenses y otros 10 de miles, aunque deberían haber sido cientos de miles de guatemaltecos y hondureños y salvadoreños, hoy tienen la residencia permanente y muchos son ciudadanos de los Estados Unidos. So it's difficult. It hasn't always been easy. But the next time, we have to be thoughtful of that process and learn from that process, that we can leave no one behind as we move towards comprehensive immigration reform. And I think that's what I've really learned, and one of the most valuable lessons. But we can always say that we need always to think of who it is we can help. It's kind of like, I remember the movie Schindler's List, right? And I remember watching the movie at the end, right? Yeah. And how many families, right? How many families did he save? Right? And his regret was he never saved enough, right? Yeah. That's the way we should always look at it, right? We never can save enough. There are families that are deserving of our energy, of our enthusiasm, of our commitment to a better, more comprehensive, more humane more respectful of our family values immigration system here in the United States of America, and I will work until we get it in the Congress of the United States. And so I wanted to share a moment to say, look, we won a victory. Muchos de ustedes vieron, ¿verdad? Yo y otros fuimos al presidente al principio de este año. The beginning of this year, we went to see our friend Barack Obama, the president, and we said, it is time now that when we are in the minority, that is Democrats, because we have to take on our own party. That's something that is very, very important. Tú sabes, nuestro movimiento es un movimiento de derechos civiles y de derechos humanos. The movement for comprehensive immigration reform is a civil rights and a human right. It cannot be tied to a political party, and whether the political party benefits or doesn't by our triumph in comprehensive immigration reform. And you remember, everybody has to Luisito, tan malo que con el presidente. Tan malo que yo soy con el presidente. Cientos de miles de deportados y familias destruidas, y yo estoy siendo malo con el presidente. No, yo lo único que dije fue lo siguiente: que la Constitución y el gobierno respeta mi relación con mi esposa y con mis hijos. Y yo quiero que tenga el mismo respeto para todas las demás familias que viven aquí en los Estados Unidos. No hay nadie aquí que duda que el presidente ama a su esposa, que ama a sus hijos, pero no se puede esconder. Hasta una niña, ¿de cuántos años tenía? 6, 7 años. ¿Te recuerdas? ¿No? De casa de Maryland. Cuando, mira, hasta la pobre primera dama haciendo su trabajo, y un trabajo muy bueno. ¿Y qué le dijo a la niña? Why is the president deporting my dad? I mean, children. And that's the kind of impact, I think, sounds almost like the military. Thank you so much. But on a serious note, so we challenge, because we have to challenge our party, we have to challenge the president. Why? There's a very important reason. Because if we do not, then we lose what is most important, the respect of the people. Because entonces todos somos falsos. Y nadie si no levantamos nuestra voz para decirle especialmente a aquel que nosotros elegimos que tiene que cumplir con su promesa. Mire, donde quiera que yo voy a través de este país, hay gente que todavía guardan en sus casas el día en que el presidente juramentó como presidente de los Estados Unidos, y me enseñan la foto y me dicen, este es el día de la traición de los sueños nuestros. Yo quiero algo mejor para mi presidente, porque yo realmente lo quiero y lo amo, y quiero que él sea el mejor presidente de los Estados Unidos, pero él no lo puede hacer si no respeta la dignidad y la integridad de la familia inmigrante aquí en este país. So that's what we try to do, to challenge. Now, I got to tell you, he said no. Remember, he brought Betty La Fea. Remember, he brought her right to the White House, and Betty said, "Well, you know, the president can't do anything else without the Congress of the." And then he brought Eva Longoria from Desperate Housewives. ¿Te recuerdas? Entonces él le dijo que ellas y los demás, los artistas. Hay Don Francisco de Sábado Gigante. And he brought them all to the White House to say what? That I and others were wrong, y que ellos de la farándula, que saben más de la política y de los derechos humanos, that he could do nothing, that he was not a dictator, that he could not bypass Congress of the United States, that the Congress had to follow the law, that he had to follow the law. And then the next week he brought labor leaders, remember, and then he brought Bloomberg and Schwarzenegger, before we know how Schwarzenegger was so intimately involved with our community. Right. And he brought Schwarzenegger, remember that? And they all came out and they said, oh, that Luis, he doesn't know what he's talking about. But what did we insist? You can do it, Mr. President. And that was the debate. Right. And then he went to, you guys remember, because some of you were in the room. Son parte de los co-conspiradores. And he came to give the big speech in August. Remember, at National Council of La Raza, and there were 2,000. Of course, the left and Fox calls them radicals, leftists of the Latino movement. I said, Casa, you know, I don't know about radical leftists. I don't know my friends from National Council of La Raza. But anyway, he was giving the speech, and then he turned to immigration, remember? And he said, there are those who simply wish me to bypass the Congress of the United States. Y te recuerdo, todo el mundo empezó a aplaudir, sí, hazlo, no le haga caso. It was one of those awkward moments when a politician makes a statement, but it's not an applause line, but it gets applause. And then he said, but I can't. ¿Y qué empezó? Todo el mundo en la audiencia, ¿verdad? Poco a poco, con el creciendo. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. And tell 2,000 people, a bewildered president looking. And I think at that moment he said, I don't think Betty La Fea and, you know, Desperate Housewives and Don Francisco have done a very good job of communicating my message. Why? Because we knew he could. And you want to know something? The 15th of August, they have a new memorandum that says if you're a criminal, if you're a gangbanger, if you're a drug dealer, if you're somebody doing violence in our community, we will prioritize your prosecution. And the memorandum is very clear for all of you to read. It says, but if you were right here at a young, tender age, and you're 18 now, we're going to cancel your case and just put it to the side. That's a victory for our community. Yo sé que no es lo que nosotros queríamos, pero permite que la gente vivan aquí con sus familias para luchar el día siguiente para conseguir la dignidad y el respeto y lo que nosotros necesitamos y lo que merecen. We have to fight today to keep them here. Because once they're deported, my brothers and sisters, I don't care what kind of comprehensive immigration reform package you pass, it will be very difficult. And once they're deported, we know the destructive nature. What's the number one crime at the federal government prosecuted? What's the number one felony prosecuted by the federal government today? Drugs? No. Murder? No. Robbery? No. Kidnapping? No. Terrorism? No. The number one prosecuted crime is illegal re-entry to the United States, and it's a felony. We cannot allow them to be deported because when they come back, they commit a felony and then are banned almost forever from being in the United States under the color of law. So we said to ourselves, that's a victory. Hay que mantenerlo aquí hoy para que mañana, cuando nosotros prosperemos, ¿no?, y ganamos la lucha, ellos pueden ser incluidos en este proceso de una reforma y de una integridad. So the memorandum is pretty clear, and it's a victory. It says if you're really young, cancel your deportation. It says if you're really old, cancel your deportation. It says if you arrived here at a young age. It also says if you're a soldier in the military of the United States of America and the government is proving to deport your wife or your husband, you must cancel that deportation. That is what we have been fighting for, a fair immigration policy. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is going to not get deported from the United States of America. We're going to lose some cases, but we're going to win so many more. Así que nosotros tenemos que tomar esta nueva ley y en las clínicas de CARECEN y en las clínicas en Chicago y en Los Ángeles y en Seattle y a través de este país, nosotros nos tenemos que armar con esta nueva información, porque sí, van a haber cientos de miles que eventualmente no serán deportados de los Estados Unidos, pero van a haber miles que se van a ir por un espacio o por otro, y es nuestro deber y responsabilidad, y es la historia de la organización CARECEN, ¿no? La historia de defender todo el mundo. And so I came here tonight to say, we have a new tool. It's an imperfect one, but we need to continue to move, and we need to continue to defend what we have, because my brothers and sisters, the elections are coming again, and then we're going to have to make another decision. And you saw Michelle Bachmann at the debate. She was wonderful. She said, well, you know, I wish it were like the 50s. Always nostalgia, right, for the 50s. Maybe his father knows best, and, you know, Leave It to Beaver, right? Remember all those movies? None of us were ever in them. No, I mean, it was a series, the weekly. I grew up, I was born in the United States, so I remember them. I used to always watch them and I used to say, Dad, you know, when are we going to have like a little parlor like that? Because, you know, we lived in an apartment. Entonces, I never saw apartments in those series on TV. Of course, we did have, what was that, I Love Lucy? Where the Cuban guy was smarter than his wife, Lucy. That was like the only thing that I could look forward to. The only one time. Porque sí, que era más inteligente que ella. Por lo menos en serio. So she says, I want to go back to the 50s. When to become a citizen, you had to learn English. When to become a citizen, you had to know about the Constitution. When to become a citizen, you had to prove that you were working and that you were working and you were paying. And he said, aparentemente ellos no han ido a las clases de CARECEN, ¿ah? Donde la gente aprende en inglés, aprende la Constitución, ¿ah? Y juramentan su amor a su nuevo país. I had a 103-year-old lady from Mexico 2 months ago. We got her sworn in as an American citizen. Y yo le dije, pero ¿por qué usted tiene tanto entusiasmo para hacerse ciudadano? And you know what she said to me? When I asked her why, she said, I want to be like, quiero ser como mis hijos. Her youngest son was 74 years old, her youngest. And he was a citizen. Y todos eran ciudadanos. And this woman can barely hear, can barely see. She's 103 years old. And what's her dream? To be like her children. In other words, to be an American citizen. Like her children before she died. And after we swore her in, yo le dije, ¿qué quieres hacer? ¿Quieres ir a comer a un sitio? And you know what she told me? She said, ¿puedo votar? Can I vote? I mean, what is there to fear from people who at the very last vestiges of their life only want to be like their children, American citizens, and their one hope is to be able to vote? That strengthens democracy and it strengthens our nation. That's why we need comprehensive immigration reform if America is to be a force for the future. And so I look at all of the things that we do together and I say, I'm going to continue to work. I'm going to continue to work to make sure. I have one last thing I want to tell you. And that is, a lot of people ask me, well, Luis, why is it Puerto Rican, you guys are citizens from birth? What's this issue? Let me tell you. My mom, she went to New York in 1951. De una montaña allá de Puerto Rico en 1951. And she went there, and yes, she was an American citizen, but when Puerto Ricans arrived in New York City, they spoke Spanish, and it was the only language they spoke. And so although they arrived as American citizens, they were looked at as what? As foreigners, as new immigrants to America. Ask Roberto Clemente, our great right fielder for the Pirates, how he was treated during segregation and during Jim Crow when he, on the Pittsburgh Pirates, when he couldn't eat at any restaurant he wanted, he couldn't have it. So that was their experience. So they experienced prejudice, they experienced hatred, they experienced discrimination. And I always said, man, Mom, every time you tell me about those stories, I get so sad. And I always, especially when I was a little kid, I said, I always wanted to be there. Todo el mundo quiere defender su mamá, right? Maybe I was too little to raise my voice for my mom, but I'm not too little to raise my voice today for mothers just like mine, working really hard in America to make sure their children have a better life. And then I went back to Puerto Rico. A los 15 años, mis padres regresan a la isla de Puerto Rico. Y yo me recuerdo cuando nos bajamos del avión y mi papá, yo le dije, papi, can I have a Coca-Cola? And he never had a problem with me speaking English for 15 years. Never had, I spoke to him in English, he spoke to me in Spanish. Y me miró así, me dijo, hijo, estamos en Puerto Rico, aquí se habla español. And I'm like, thanks for letting me in on it. Now 15 years you've been wanting to come back to this little island in the Caribbean. You should have told me, I would have practiced my Spanish a little more. But then I went to school and the teacher said, ¿Cómo te llamas? Yo le dije, I wasn't quite sure because Gutierrez, it gets, Gutierrez, Gutierrez. I mean, every school year I had a different pronunciation for mine. I didn't mind. I thought it was kind of unique because Smith is boring year in and year out. At least I got to change every year. So I'm thinking, well, what am I going to talk? El profesor Hernández, porque la H es muda. Y las muchachas son hermosas. You guys get the drift. So I'm sitting there and I said, Luis Gutierrez. Y todo el mundo se ríe. Y el profesor me dice, no sé cómo son las cosas en Estados Unidos, pero aquí en Puerto Rico hay unos requisitos mínimos que hay que saber su nombre para matricularte. Porque tú no tienes madre. And then I got really, because in the barrio back in Chicago, you made jokes about your uncle, no, about your cousins, your sister, but never about your mother. So I kind of like, my mother, why are you making fun of my mother? So I went home crying, and my mom taught me my name at the age of 15. And I practiced it all night. You know, in that mirror. I always thought adolescencia was the science of dolor. And it isn't. You can look it up, the root words don't. But I always thought that that's where it came from. And I said, Luis Vicente Gutierrez Olmedo, Luis Vicente. And I said, caray, qué nombre más magnífico. Puedo ser como poeta, no sé, por lo menos, ¿verdad? En Telemundo, en la televisión, algún sitio, telenovela con un nombre así. I really felt good, and I went back the next day. Y había una muchachita sentada en la esquina. There was a girl, she was sitting right in the corner. And I walked up to her, because I had practiced my name, and I said, hola. Mi nombre es Luis Vicente Gutierrez Olmedo. ¿Cómo tú te llamas? She was like, she raised her hand. Mister, that's what they call the teachers in Puerto Rico, Mister. It's Spanish, but they call them Mister. Don't ask me to explain that to you. Mister. Y dice, ¿qué pasa? El gringo me está molestando. Now, I want you to laugh, because it's good to laugh. We live longer, and it also teaches us something. I wanted to tell you something, the whole classroom, I never felt so small, so isolated, so humiliated, so little. I don't know, I wanted to disappear. I never felt that kind of pain of being like set aside and laughed at and ridiculed. And I gotta tell you, that laughter and that day gave me my vocation for those that are strangers, sometimes even in their own land. Because every day there are people that arrive in America, and we see them and we laugh at them and we ridicule them and we make fun of, they don't know the language and the mores, and maybe we don't like the way they pronounce their names. But you know something? CARECEN knows one thing. If you had been there, you would not have laughed. You would have embraced me for my humanity, as people did. And so I came here tonight to celebrate CARECEN, because I know that when you see people just like me when I was 15 years old, you extend a warm hand of friendship and of humanity to them, so that they can be better. Gracias por la invitación. Espero que tengan una tremenda celebración. Adiós.